lovely people, welcome back to another Story Study Saturday. I'm Sammy and I'm a writer who likes to learn about writing through reading and share what I learned with you. This week we are talking about Mr. Malcolm's List, which I saw an ad for on my Fire Stick and I was looking at it and I was like, interesting. So I watched the trailer and it said that it was based on a book, so I read the book. So here we are. If you're interested in a summary, here is one. In a Jane Austen era London, Mr. Malcolm is the bachelor that everyone pines after. He's rich and handsome, but has become known for being a bit of a heartbreaker. When he unwittingly spurns the wrong woman, she sets out to have him feel the same pain he's caused many women after the discovery of his list of qualifications of his future wife. She brings in a friend, Selina, who has no interest in the plot Julia has come up with, but simply wants to experience life before having to go home to her parents. But what happens if Selina and Mr. Malcolm actually fall in love? So let's get into my thoughts. This is a very cute concept. It's a very, very cute concept, and it has the same energy as a lot of Jane Austen stories, but on a lower effort level. It's a bit simpler and easier to read, and therefore makes it more of a leisure activity, a bit more fun to read than like Jane Austen is, because I feel like Jane Austen, while being great storytelling, takes a bit more brain power than what everybody always wants to offer. So this being set in the same era and the same general kind of vibe is really interesting in a reading perspective, because if you're in the mood for Jane Austen style drama, but not in the mood to think as hard as you have to comprehend Jane Austen, this is a great replacement. This is a great substitute, and it's a fun story in general. The era that it's written in is comfortable to like settle into because of the acquaintance that many of us have with Jane Austen just through like school classes, or having watched the movies because the movies are really accessible, or just reading it because you wanted to read it. There's also play adaptations of her work. There's a lot of ways that you can be able to associate with Jane Austen and get the vibe of it. And this is just like another kind of version. It's another way of being in that vibe. Because of the vibe, it feels like it's a more advanced reading than it actually is. So when you fly through it, it feels a little bit more rewarding than it probably should. At least for me, I was definitely more rewarded than I probably should have been, but I did enjoy that experience of it being like, it's not hard to follow. There's a smaller amount of characters. It's very easy to follow what everybody's motivation is, who's related to who in what way, how does everybody know each other, and all of that kind of thing, because we aren't given details on characters that don't matter, or details on characters that are just sort of there. We're given details on the characters that matter, and we're brushed over by the other characters. I don't even think that they named many other characters outside of the ones that mattered. So you are definitely more easily able to follow everything that's going on, and it's not a very complicated conflict. It's a very simple conflict, but it's still very entertaining. So what do I think could be improved about this little fun fiction? The way the narration works is that it's like a close third person. You're with Malcolm, like you're going from third person, you're thinking with Malcolm, like Malcolm's perspective is being the one that's told in this third person. And rather than doing what like first person narratives do when they switch completely, like who's narrating to somebody else, it moved very awkwardly from being close with one person in one paragraph to being close with another person in the next paragraph, by like reiterating something, but from a different perspective. So like, for example, Malcolm believed Selina to be just as perturbed by the interruption as he. And then the next paragraph is like, Malcolm was correct in his assumption as Selina eyed the newcomer warily. Like, the next paragraph is from Selina's perspective. She's eyeing the person warily. She doesn't know that Malcolm assumed that she was bothered, but like, that's how we transition. I feel like that definitely could have been more effective, and I don't really know what I would do to change that, because I understand why it's doing that, but at the same time, like, did we need to have the same statement made twice? Why couldn't we just go from like, Malcolm assumed that she was bothered, and then she goes and she's eyeing him warily? Why do we have to transition by saying the same thing twice from two different characters' perspectives? And that happened so many times that I was like, why are we doing this? And honestly, for how quick, easy, fun, and enjoyable this book was, it was one of the only things that actively took me out of the story and made me be like, oh my gosh, why are we here, you know? There was also another really, really small thing that only started happening towards the end, but it happened like 4 times, and I was like, okay, we get it, which was the making of a joke without making the joke by cutting somebody off from their statement in a way that made it seem like they were gonna say something inappropriate. It makes it like a euphemism where it's like, oh, I catch your meaning before they can say something, but they're like, actually, I was gonna say something totally innocent, but you think that it's something else. And I could see it being not a problem if one character was doing the interrupting. If it's one character consistently being like, I catch your meaning, who's that person? That one person has the dirty mind. That's fine. But the problem was that it was the opposite. There was one person who was getting interrupted by a whole bunch of different people, which means nothing. It means nothing. It means that there is a bit that was made, and then that bit was funny to the author or to the editor or something. So they were able to put it in multiple times rather than establish it as a character trait. They just put the same bit in, and it was like, okay, we get it, we get it, we get it. Okay, you're trying to make jokes. But it was only at the end of the book too. Like, it didn't happen in the beginning. It just, like 4 of them within like 3 chapters at the very end of the book. So it was very noticeable because they were very compact and like together. And it didn't really have any motivation from anywhere else in the story. So it was like, okay, we're here, almost making dirty jokes, but not. Okay. So what can writers learn from this story? You don't have to do a retelling if you want to take inspiration from the classics. Like, this is clearly pulling inspiration from the classics, and it's not like, I'm gonna tell this story again, but like more modern. They're taking a more modern type of conflict and putting it into a past era timeline. Like, they're putting a conflict that somebody would come up with for like a Hallmark movie, and they're putting it into Jane Austen era. And it's so much more interesting. So you can take things and manipulate them into something that is clearly inspired by a classic without having to take the storyline of the classic, which is what I think happens with some retellings, is you take something that somebody already created and you remold it. So you're like taking some clay that's already been shaped. You're just doing some tweaks to it. You're changing other stuff. I don't know enough about pottery to make that analogy, but you're not doing as much, where this came up with a whole story and just placed it into something that would make you feel the way that you feel when reading a classic. And that was super, super effective. And I'm honestly really looking forward to the movie because I do really enjoy the Jane Austen adaptation movies and plays. Like, they're way more fun to me than the book. And the fact that this book was so fun, I think the movie is going to be a blast as well. And another thing you can learn from this is that if you want to write in a classical style, if you want to write in that reminiscent of classical texts, you don't have to write really stiff and intellectually and in some cases boring. You don't have to do that much effort. You can make things simpler. You can make things more accessible to English that we use today, and you can make it fun while still having that, like, it's inspired by classic texts. This is clearly inspired by classic texts, and it's fun to read. I think that's a really important juxtaposition because a lot of people will look at classic texts, people who read classics and prefer classics will look at classic texts and say it's more complicated, it's more intellectual, you have to be smarter to be able to enjoy these stories, or some other pretentious thing like that. I guess I shouldn't say a lot of people, but a lot of people that I've encountered that prefer classic novels over modern contemporary novels have that. So if you're not like that, I appreciate you and your lack of pretentiousness towards classic novels, but like, you can still appreciate the artistry, the energy, the vibes around historical writing, classic texts. You can enjoy that without making it something bigger than it has to be, without making it something that it's like, oh, well, if you don't understand my writing, like, then you shouldn't be reading it. You can have the same respect for these things of the past and make them more accessible to other people for their enjoyment rather than for their, like, ability to say that they're better at reading than other people or whatever. So I do really appreciate that about this book, that it's easy to read, but still gives you the same emotional experience as a Jane Austen novel. And I enjoy that. I have a lot of respect for that. So being able to respect the classics and enjoy them and reiterate their experiences in the modern era without ostracizing people or making people feel like they're less than to be able to read these particular novels. It's good vibes, pretty much. It's good for the reading community. It's good for people to be able to be a part of something. And it's good, just general like writing practices, to have a book that people want to read and write a book that's for you. If you enjoy classic novels, this book probably was written for the author to have read because they wanted to read this story, and it's enjoyable. It's fun to read. It's a fun story, and other people can read it. And it doesn't have to be exclusively for people who like reading the classics. And I love that because it's got the energy. It's got the energy of a classic without the pretentious air around it, which I feel like is hard to find in contemporary stories that are inspired by the classics in this way. So it does do a very good job of making it accessible and entertaining, while also reflecting the art of it. But that is all that I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Have you read Mr. Malcolm's List? Have you seen the movie? What are your thoughts? A lot of people were looking at it and being like, oh, the story is so simple, such a simple conflict. But sometimes a simple conflict is just what you need. Like, you need just like something that doesn't have any stakes. You need a character that's so passionate that they're right, even though their conflict doesn't really matter to anybody but them. You need that sometimes because that's what life is. Some people just are like that. And this is a great, very funny way of experiencing that. If you don't want to miss any of my uploads, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. I'm here every Tuesday and Saturday for Writing Tip Tuesdays and Story Study Saturdays. So I will see you guys on Tuesday for a Writing Tip Tuesday.